I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our March Webinette. Today we're going to talk about evaluating your site's taxonomy. This is part one in the Findability series. My name is Scott Gunter and I'm Vice President of User Experience here at Usability Sciences. I've been a UX researcher for over 13 years. A couple of small items here. We understand your time is valuable, so we do plan to keep this presentation to about 20 minutes. And we'll have Q&A at the end of today's visit. So why Findability? Over the last decade, we've been conducting site intercept research using an internal tool, and we have found that the number one reason that visitors, and this is self-reported, but that visitors are not successful because they could not find what they're looking for. We typically have found that it's true in over 50% of failed visits revolve around findability. Over the years, in our efforts to better understand findability, we have broken this down into three different influencers. The first is site search. This is your keyword search, typically found towards the top of your global navigation, top of your page. Navigation, so whether it's a flyout menu, a drop-down menu, etc., but the ways in which your visitor traverses your site. And then ultimately your taxonomy. As you can see in this example, produce, fruit, apples, it's those terms and structures that are provided for your visitors to find information. In part one of our series, we're going to focus really on the role that the site's taxonomy plays in your visitor's ability to find the product or generally the content he or she is looking for. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. What I first want to do before we get into that is I want to define taxonomy, or at least how we define taxonomy. And the way we do that is we define it as a representation of the hierarchical structure of a website's content. You can see in this example here, obviously abbreviated taxonomy, but produce is your top level category. Within produce you have fruit and vegetables. Within fruit you have apples, bananas, etc. So when we evaluate a taxonomy, our primary focus is on the category labels and then that structure, that relationship, whether it be parent to child, child to sibling, parent to sibling, etc. But we really look at the relationship in that structure as well as the actual labels themselves. You'll notice throughout this presentation that I'll use the words taxonomy, structure, hierarchy, and tree interchangeably. Those really all, from our perspective, mean the same, or at least I'm describing them in the same way. And this is important because when we talk to customers about taxonomy, we feel it's very important to make sure that everyone is on the same page. We found throughout our experiences that many customers have different definitions, and so we think it's important to all get on the same page before you really start talking about how to best evaluate your site's taxonomy. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about a couple of different approaches to evaluating your taxonomy. The first is card sorting. Many of you may be more familiar with card sorting. It's been around for quite a while. More recently, online technologies have been developed that allow you to conduct card sorting exercises through the web. So a card sorting process is a process where participants are asked to arrange content from your website into groups that make sense to them. You can see in this example here, on the left you have products such as ice cream, tuna, pumpkin, etc. And basically what they'll do is you'll have the participant drag into the white space and group like products. Now there are two types of card sorts. One is an open card sort. In this scenario, as I just described, participants would drag and drop these different products and they would group them by like products. The difference is an open card sort, the participants are asked to name each of those groups. Whereas in a closed sort, participants are asked to arrange the content into predefined groups. And so what that means is that us as the researcher or you internally would have defined these grouping names, whether it's based off of previous research, what you have today, different ideas that you have within the business, etc., but that you would predefine those, and so there would already be buckets on the right side if you take this image example and they would be dragging the products into those predefined or pre-named buckets. So that's your open and your closed card sort. We'll talk about in just a little bit when it makes sense to use this methodology. The other one that I'll talk about, the other approach, is tree testing. I would suspect that most of you are less familiar with this methodology, but essentially a tree test is a process where participants are asked to identify the location of content within a simplified text version of your site structure. That's the tree. So if you see in this example here, very simple task, where would you find tomatoes? The options are the user can skip this task, or what we want them to do is ultimately pick between these top level categories listed here, dairy, bakery, produce. As they click on one of those that they think makes the most sense, let's say they click on produce, the tree will keep expanding and allowing them to drill down and make those decisions as to where they would expect to find tomatoes until they get to the lowest level. The lowest level is something you would define or the research group would define in the tree. You can test this as deep as you want to test, but ultimately they're faced with the decision of I find it here, or again they skip this task. Very simple from the user's perspective, and we'll talk here in a little bit about the richness of the data that you get. So in this case they selected produce, fruit, and then the find it here would be displayed, and that would, by selecting that would end the task and they move on to the next task. So the reason you test in this manner is it really ensures that the tree, that your structure is evaluated in isolation. There's no navigational aids, visual designs, there's no other influencers. So it's really a way to kind of evaluate your tree to see if it stood on its own, would people be able to know where to find content. So I'm not going to get into a lot of details about the specific tools that exist in the marketplace, but I did want to bring those to your attention. And I suspect there are more out there. These are ones that we are familiar with, but on the card sorting tools you can see up at the top, as well as the tree testing tools there on the bottom. And I will say they all have very different. They offer similar things, but there are different nuances into their feature set. So you definitely want to take a look at these and see if that makes sense for your project. So now the big question, you've got a couple of approaches you can take. The next thought you probably have is, well, when should I do a card sort? When should I do an open card sort versus a closed? When should I do tree testing? And obviously this is important when you think about what's the best way to evaluate your site's taxonomy. So on one end of the spectrum, if you think about an open card sort, it is very much a creative exercise. You just have this list of products and they're supposed to place it into buckets. They're supposed to then name those buckets. It's very much a creative exercise. You would typically do an open card sort if you let's say it's a new website, you're starting completely from scratch, or let's say you've decided you don't like anything you have and you want to start all over, or maybe you're introducing a new line of products or a new category of products and you need to add on to your existing taxonomy. Very much though something where you have a little bit more of a blank canvas to work from, because like I said, it is a very creative exercise. On the flip side, with tree testing, it's very much geared for evaluating a taxonomy that already exists or validating one that's being proposed. So this may be a situation where you realize that you have your existing taxonomy, but you're looking for ways to tweak or to optimize what you have, or maybe there are some suggestions within the business to change certain elements of your taxonomy, and you want to do a validation to see, is it really going to allow users to find information more quickly and more efficiently. What we find is that most clients really do not have the appetite to start over, and so we typically see them coming in right at the point of where tree testing makes the most sense, whether it's for business reasons, client, or their customer perspective. They just want to look for ways to tweak their existing taxonomy, and so tree testing is we think a great solution for that. And because of that, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about what comes out of tree testing here in a little bit. But before we get there, while card sorting and tree testing gives you a very rich data set and very insightful information to help you evaluate your site's taxonomy. There are certainly some other research activities that should be considered. This obviously will be based on your objectives, your budget, what timeline you have, etc. But I just want to take a moment to talk about each of these. The first is doing a competitive taxonomy assessment. Understand how are your competitors approaching the product set and their taxonomy or content. This isn't to say you should do everything just like your competitors, but you'll notice a trend as I go through this Webinette is I'm a firm believer in having multiple sources of research and multiple sources of data in order to support what you recommend to the business. And so looking at how your competitors approach things is very important. Also, is conduct an expert review. Take a look at your existing taxonomy. Now, I would recommend using a third party for this because oftentimes we find clients are so biased and so baked in with what they currently have. It's really hard to take that objective look at it. So this is looking at it from best practices and just very common sense things to assess with your taxonomy. And then talk with stakeholders. This isn't just the folks who, the way I look at this, stakeholders in this case would be folks that either impact or that either affect the taxonomy in terms of their responsibility and their job role, or are impacted by changes within the taxonomy. So this could be anywhere from merchandisers to SEO, user experience folks within your organization, etc. But obviously we think it's important to understand the process that the organization goes through because one of the things that's very critical is it's one thing to do an evaluation and to make changes. It's a different thing to ensure that over time that you sustain a quality taxonomy. So stakeholder discussions are very valuable. And most importantly in this is obviously talk to your customers. Now, we think a customer focus group environment is very conducive for taxonomy research. And it's not to take the taxonomy and put it in front of them and say, what do you think? It's really to understand how they think about looking for products and how they think about, let's say in the case of retail shopping for men, it's bring men in, talk to them about how they think about shopping for men's clothing. Bring in women and ask them how they think about shopping for their sons and for their husbands and things of that nature for their clothing. It's really try to get into their heads to think about how they approach it because it most certainly will impact how you approach your taxonomy. And then finally, look at the web analytics and sales data you have. Now, this isn't going to paint the whole picture, but it's most certainly information you want to look at from a category, from a visitor perspective, from where there are trends in your web analytics data and your sales data. Again, these are all different activities that when you take each of them individually, they're valuable, but they're not as powerful as when you take them as a whole, coupled with the tree testing and the card sorting. It really adds value. So as I mentioned, let's kind of go in a little bit more into tree testing and what comes out of this data. So if you think about what we're looking at here is a table where on the left you have the products that folks were asked. So this, if you remember the example, where would you find money clip? And this is presented in descending order to where you get to the bottom right, where would you find handkerchief? What that's saying is that only 10% of these participants found the correct location. Now, one thing to note is when you are setting up a tree test, you do configure it to designate where the content actually is. So where are the successful locations for this content? The participant generally does not know that. They're just asked to place it and then they move on to the next task. But obviously to get to these numbers, that's an important part of it. So this, just very quickly as you look at this, you can kind of see where you have some problems in terms of folks being able to correctly find the category in which this product resides. So now the next, where you probably are going in your head is, okay, that's great, handkerchiefs, that was problematic. Where did they think it would be? So here are some examples. You notice there's nothing highlighted in red. So these were all ones that had 100% success. But you can see in the case of money clip, 55% expected it to be in belts and wallets, and these are the categories that this example includes. This is of a men's retail site. 21% in jewelry and 23% in gifts and gadgets. So it's still helpful, even if they are successful, to see that distribution of where they thought it would be. Now, here are a few examples in where they were less successful. So we talked about handkerchiefs at 10%. You can see that 48% expected it to be in hats, scarves, and gloves, 22% in underwear, and so forth. Same for school uniform, polo, and actually very emphatically, 70% expected it to be in uniforms and scrubs, even though it's not there. We'll talk about just in a moment here of why we, what we discovered in the research that uncovered why they made this decision. Another way to look at the tree testing results is to kind of flip it on its axis and look at it now from a category. So which categories had the most correctly categorized products placed within it during tree testing. So you can see on this table, it's a list of categories, again, from most successful to least successful. And you can see that, for example, uniforms and scrubs in the bottom right corner there, of the categories, of the products that were placed in there, participants only placed 68% of them correctly. And so that starts to give you a feeling for where your taxonomy has some problems and where there's some opportunities to improve. In the same vein as we mentioned earlier, you can see a breakout. So in this first example here, on the left, hats, scarves, and gloves is a category. Here are the products that were placed into that category by participants. The ones in red do not exist there. So you can see that scarves and beanie caps were products that do exist there, and they were placed in that category 42% of the times and 35% of the time, respectively. But you can see that handkerchiefs, 21% expected it to go there, and it wasn't. So again, it really gives you, based on the knowledge you have of your business and your categorization, it really gives you some impactful and insightful data. As I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of attacking the evaluation of your site's taxonomy with this multi-phase, multi-pronged approach is it provides you more confidence in providing these very impactful recommendations. And I want to give you a few examples of what I mean by this. So this first example, and we're really going to focus in just to give you kind of a layout of this. On the left, we have the recommendation we made to the customer. In the center, we have the supporting evidence. Again, multiple data sources, multiple research activities were conducted, and here is the supporting evidence. I think about it like a good reporter who is going to have multiple sources, so that when you read an article, it gives itself more credibility, and you have more confidence that what's being said is truthful because you have multiple sources. And it's the same case here as well. And then finally, your client action. I think it was important to share what did the client actually do based on our recommendation. So in this example, you see in the graphic in the bottom left, and obviously this is an abbreviated version of the taxonomy, but you had workwear, young men's, and uniforms plus scrubs. So what we recommended is that they relocate uniforms and scrubs under workwear. And the reason we did this is our recommendation was to reduce the chance that visitors, remember they were looking for school uniforms, would reduce the chance that they would look for school uniforms within uniforms and scrubs because it's actually within young men's. And so what drove us to this recommendation is first, that 70% incorrectly placed school uniforms and scrubs. It's not there, but you can obviously see the word association that led them down that path. In addition, when we talked with folks in the focus group, we found that they really preferred scrubs and uniforms to be under workwear because they said, look, that's workwear. You only wear those things as work clothing and not school clothing. So from their perspective, it made absolute sense to have uniforms and scrubs to be a subcategory, if you will, under workwear. When we did the competitive taxonomy assessment, we also found that all of this client's direct competitors offer work-related uniforms under scrubs. Work-related uniforms under workwear. So it really supported our recommendation. Because again, the thinking is if you're faced with looking for school uniforms and your choices are workwear, young men's, you're less likely to be led astray by going down with these choices than you would if uniforms and scrubs was displayed at the same level. So what ultimately the client did in this case was they kind of took a hybrid approach, and what they did is they actually merged these two categories to create workwear and scrubs. And And the reason they did this was, they still moved ultimately uniforms and scrubs within this. The product assortment moved under workwear. But they also felt that scrubs was a very important part of their business, and they didn't want to, in their words, bury it down a level. And so what they did was they created workwear plus scrubs while still moving that content under it. So I think the effect was still the same, but obviously, and we completely understand that no one's going to know your business better than you, especially not a third party like ourselves. So we think it's important to share what they actually did. In this case, I think it was a very impactful change. One other recommendation is that if you think about the example we had of the handkerchief, and that was one that had very low success in the tree testing. Originally, they had hats, scarves plus gloves, dress shirts plus ties, and gifts and gadgets. So our recommendation was to move handkerchief underneath hat, scarves, and gloves, and also because they were asked to what should we do with the category name, we actually recommended to keep it the same. Do not change hat, scarves, and gloves, just add handkerchiefs underneath it. The supporting evidence that we had from the 3 research activities, the competitive assessment, the focus groups, as well as the tree testing, we found that 48% expected to find handkerchief within hat, scarves, and gloves. One of the very insightful things we found in the focus group was that participants indicated that handkerchiefs were commonly found near hats, scarves, and gloves in the store. So their association with their store experience really carried over to how they approached looking for products online, and so it made sense for them to go to hats, scarves, and gloves to find this product. When we looked at competitors, there really wasn't, it was kind of neutral. Some competitors had separate categories for things like this. Others just had kind of a very general catch-all accessories bucket. So, didn't really sway us one way or the other here in terms of supporting evidence, or at least our recommendation. And then finally, what the client actually did is they took our recommendation, they put handkerchiefs under hats, scarves, and gloves, and they even went one step further and cross-listed it under dress shirts and ties as well. So they really kind of took it and said, look, we want to put it in several different places in addition to what we had recommended. And so that covers what we are going to talk about today as it relates to evaluating your site's taxonomy. I do want to mention that in our next Webinette, and part of this Findability series, in part 2, we're really going to focus in on different approaches of how you can diagnose your site search experience. So we'll talk about relevance, context, and outcome analysis, meta tagging analysis, as well as filter refinement analysis. And this is, faceted navigation, guided navigation, whatever your business calls it, but the ability to evaluate the filtering options that you provide your customers. And that's it for today's Webinette. I thank you for your time, and we look forward to you joining us in the next Webinette on the Findability series. Thank you.